You know that panic you feel when someone unexpectedly knocks on your door at a weird hour and you think something terrible has happened? Yeah, imagine that, except it's 4 a.m. every single morning. And it's not your door, it's your second floor bedroom window. And you specifically paid someone to do this. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1900, Manchester, England. You're a factory worker and your shift starts at 5 a.m. sharp. Show up late and you lose half a day's wages. Show up late 3 times and you're fired. No second chances. Your family depends on this job. But alarm clocks? Those exist, sure. Mechanical ones have been around since the 1800s, but they're expensive, cost about a week's wages for a factory worker. You can't afford one. Most people can't. So what do? You hire a knocker-upper. At exactly 4 a.m., you hear it. Tap, tap, tap on your bedroom window. The same rhythm every morning. You jolt awake, heart racing from the sudden noise. You stumble to the window and wave to show you're up. Below, in the dark street, there's a person with a long pole, sometimes made of bamboo, sometimes just a stick, moving on to the next house. Tap, tap, tap on the next window. Then the next. Then the next. This person walks the same route every morning, tapping on dozens of windows, waking up an entire neighborhood of factory workers, miners, fishermen, bakers, anyone who needed to be up before dawn and couldn't afford a clock. And here's what nobody tells you about knocker-uppers. This wasn't some charming quirk of old England. This was a person, often an elderly person or someone who couldn't do physical labor, walking through dangerous pre-dawn streets in all weather, performing a job that required perfect timing and reliability for pennies, literally pennies. They'd get paid about 6 pence a week per client, maybe a shilling if they were lucky. That's roughly $5 to $10 in today's money, per week, for waking up earlier than everyone else every single day, no days off, no matter the weather. But there's something even stranger happening beneath the surface, because here's the question nobody asks. Who woke up the knocker-upper? Let's talk about the actual logistics of this job for a minute. The knocker-upper had to wake up before everyone else, significantly before. If you needed to be woken at 4 a.m., the knocker-upper had to be up by 3:30 a.m. to start their route. Earlier routes meant even earlier wake times. Some knocker-uppers started their rounds at 2 or 3 a.m. for clients who worked night shifts or early market vendors. So who woke them up? Some knocker-uppers claimed they just had an internal clock. Years of waking at the same time trained their bodies to naturally wake early. Maybe. Seems unreliable for a job where being late meant your clients got fired. Some used multiple cheap alarm clocks set at staggered times. The clocks weren't reliable individually, but 3 or 4 cheap clocks going off at slightly different times, one of them would probably work. Some used candle clocks, candles with marks at specific heights. You'd light the candle before bed, and when it burned down to a certain mark, it would fall over or trigger a mechanism. Unreliable as hell, but better than nothing. And some knocker-uppers lived in areas where factory sirens or church bells rang at specific times. They'd use those as their wake-up call, then immediately start their routes. But here's something that'll mess with you. There were knocker-uppers who specialized in waking up other knocker-uppers, the meta knocker-upper, someone who woke up even earlier to wake up the people who woke up everyone else. It's knocker-uppers all the way down. The job itself was harder than it sounds. You couldn't just tap on any window randomly. You had to know which window belonged to which client. In tenement buildings where dozens of families lived stacked on top of each other, you had to hit the exact right window. Hit the wrong one and you'd wake someone who didn't hire you, and they'd be pissed. The tools varied. Some knocker-uppers used long bamboo poles with soft tips, gentle enough not to break glass but loud enough to wake someone. Some used pea shooters, shooting dried peas at windows. The peas would rattle against the glass loud enough to wake the person inside, but wouldn't damage anything. Some used long wires with knobs on the end that they'd rattle against the window. Some just threw small stones or gravel, whatever worked. In some areas, knocker-uppers had specific rhythms or patterns, so clients would know it was their knocker-upper and not just random noise. Your knocker-upper might do 3 quick taps,
pause, 2 more taps, different from the rhythm they used for other clients. The job required you to work in darkness, in all weather. Rain, snow, fog, didn't matter. Your clients needed to wake up regardless of conditions. You'd be walking cobblestone streets with no streetlights, carrying a long pole, trying not to trip or fall. And the clients? They didn't always cooperate. Some people were deep sleepers. The knocker-upper would have to tap for several minutes, increasingly loudly until they woke up. But tap too loud and you'd wake the neighbors, who'd yell at you or throw things. Some clients would wake up, wave that they were awake, then immediately fall back asleep. The knocker-upper would have to check back, waste more time, tap again. Some clients wouldn't pay. They'd use the service for weeks, wake up reliably, then claim they didn't need it anymore or didn't have the money. What was the knocker-upper going to do? Sue them? They'd just stop waking them, which meant that person would probably lose their job, but it also meant the knocker-upper lost income. The profession was almost entirely working class and elderly, people who couldn't do physical factory work anymore but still needed income. Retired workers, widows, disabled people who could walk but couldn't do manual labor. The job required no equipment except a stick and no skills except showing up on time. It was a job born purely from economic necessity on both sides. Workers couldn't afford clocks, knocker-uppers couldn't do other work. So they created this bizarre symbiotic relationship where one person's poverty solution became another person's poverty job. And then the alarm clock got cheap. By the 1920s and 30s, mass production made alarm clocks affordable. You could buy a reliable mechanical alarm clock for a day's wages instead of a week's. Still expensive for the poorest workers, but accessible to most. And once you owned an alarm clock, you didn't need to pay a knocker-upper 6 pence a week anymore. That 6 pence could buy food. The choice was obvious. Knocker-uppers started losing clients. By the 1940s, the profession was mostly dead. A few held on into the 1950s in very poor areas or rural communities, but by the 1960s, knocker-uppers had completely disappeared. The last known knocker-upper in England was Mary Smith of Brenton, who continued working into the early 1970s using a pea shooter to wake her clients. When she retired, the profession ended. We got what we wanted: cheap, reliable alarm clocks that we controlled. No more depending on another person to wake us up. No more anxiety about whether they'd show up. No more paying weekly for a service we could do ourselves with a machine. But we lost something too. We lost the human connection of the morning wake-up, someone who knew you needed to be up, who made sure you didn't oversleep, who cared enough, or at least was paid enough, to keep knocking until you woke up. We lost a job that gave elderly and disabled people income and purpose. Knocker-uppers weren't doing glamorous work, but it was dignified work that utilized the one resource they had, the ability to wake up early. We lost accountability. If you slept through your alarm clock, that was on you. But if your knocker-upper didn't show up, that was on them. There was someone else responsible for your morning, which meant you weren't completely alone in managing your life. Now you set an alarm on your phone. Maybe 3 alarms, maybe 10, all 5 minutes apart, because you've trained yourself to ignore the first 9. You wake up alone. You snooze alone. If you oversleep, there's nobody to blame but yourself. The knocker-upper system was inefficient, created jobs that shouldn't have needed to exist, and only survived because people were too poor to afford basic technology. But it also meant that every morning, before the sun came up, someone was checking on you, making sure you were okay, making sure you got to work, making sure you didn't fail. And maybe that's the real story here. Not about knocker-uppers or alarm clocks or industrial Britain, but about how we keep replacing human solutions with mechanical ones and calling it progress. The next time you hit snooze on your phone alarm for the 5th time, annoyed at the sound, wishing you could just sleep another 10 minutes, remember there used to be a person standing in the cold at 4 a.m. with a stick tapping on your window, making sure you got up because they knew you couldn't lose your job. They weren't doing it because they loved you. They were doing it because you paid them 6 pence a week and they needed that money to survive. But they still showed up every morning, in the rain, in the snow, in the dark. And when they stopped showing up, when alarm clocks replaced them, we all became a little more alone. That's not just history, that's the sound of knocking that nobody answers anymore.